What happens when you put a character from a 40-year-old comic, dinosaurs, and gratuitous amounts of violence together? In all honesty, I wouldn't be able to tell you, as I am not a geneticist. But back in March of 1997, we would find out what would happen if you did.
Oh, hey there, kids. It's me, the dadliest man in town. Today, as I was doing my dad things, such as shopping for polos online and re-watching Jurassic Park in an effort to recapture the feelings it gave me in my childhood.
Oh my god, he's so fucking cool!
I started thinking, Jurassic Park, Trespasser, which in all honesty did not work on my PC. So instead today we'll be taking a look at Turok, Dinosaur Hunter.
In this retrospective, we'll be taking a look at the development history of Turok, along with its gameplay, lore, and reception on release. At the end, I'll give my overall opinion on the game, and maybe by that time, you'll have formed your own opinion on it as well. For gameplay, even though I've played through both the remastered and original versions of the game, we'll look at the remastered game footage, and I'll do some comparisons to the original that was released back in 1997. I'd like to extend a big thanks to the Long Play Archive channel. They were a big help in capturing the N64 footage, since I currently do not have the equipment to capture footage directly from the console itself. Give their channel a look for non-commentary gameplays, as it's channels like this that help us archive games that might at some point become lost in time. The link will be in the description. Guys, thank you so much. Originally announced in August of 1994, Turok was slated to be an exclusive title for Nintendo's up-and-coming Ultra 64. The console that would later be aptly renamed as the Nintendo 64. Before this announcement, Acclaim, having recently bought Voyager Communications, which in turn meant they owned the brand rights to Turok, thought the storyline would be a good candidate for the upcoming console. After buying Voyager, Acclaim also acquired Iguana Entertainment, a development studio based out of Texas. For Acclaim, who at this point were mainly a publisher, this meant they would have both the possibility to create video games in-house and possibly make money in licensing other characters they had gained from buying Voyager. Development for Turok officially began in 1996 by Iguana and was done by a 15-person team. In the early stages of development, thoughts were given about making the game a side-scroller, but feeling that that specific genre had grown old and the technical developments being made by the Nintendo 64, the decision was eventually made to make Turok a first-person shooter instead. Because Acclaim had a long-time partnership with Nintendo from back in the NES and SNES days, the development team would have an easier time communicating with the publisher, receiving earlier feedback and more face-to-face time. However, most of the team consisted of people new and inexperienced with game development. For David Dinspeer, the development manager at the time, it would be the first time working on a video game. David was worried about Turok due to the amount of violence included in the game. He worried that Nintendo would find it to be unacceptable, but for some reason, Nintendo never asked to see or approve anything regarding the game. While the team was doing their best to develop the best quality game they could at the time, they were running into hardware constraints, which would see them having to make certain sacrifices. The Nintendo 64's cartridges would only allow up to 8 megabytes of data being stored on it, forcing Iguana to use a lot of compression and lowering the quality of the game's soundtrack to be able to store it. On top of this, Acclaim was facing tough times in 1996. Though the company was a well-known and respected publisher, having a hand in well-known games during the NES and SNES era, such as Double Dragon, Mortal Kombat, and Mortal Kombat 2, they were slow to switch over to the new generation of consoles. This eventually led to poor sales numbers by 1996, forcing the company to lay off 100 from its staff of 950. All bets were on Turok, being one of only 10 titles available on the N64 and the only shooter available on the platform at that time. Originally, the game was slated for a September 1996 release, but was eventually postponed later to March of 1997 due to the developers not feeling it was up to their and Nintendo's quality standards. Eventually, due to a heavy marketing initiative from Acclaim, pre-orders for the game performed better than expected, leading to the publisher stating that the sequel, then called Turok Dinosaur Hunter 2, would enter active development and would be released in 1997. Though the release of Turok 2, Seeds of Evil, would be pushed back to the end of 1998, it was clear that there was a demand for the brand. Possibly because anyone living through the early to mid-90s would be able to tell you that dinosaurs were absolutely everywhere. Mostly due to Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park being such a massive hit at the box office. If you consider how much velociraptors played a role in that movie, it's safe to say that the box art of a man literally going one-on-one with a raptor would captivate you back in 1997, even if you hadn't heard of Turok before. With all of that said, let's head into the story and see what this game is all about. The backstory to Turok leans heavily on the existing lore from the comics. Being able to lend from an extensive narrative by years of comics that came before the game. The original story is based on the comic book series Turok, Son of Stone by Dell Comics, originally published in 1954. In 1956, Turok, Son of Stone would be published in its own series. These stories follow the titular character Turok and his younger brother Andar, becoming trapped in a mysterious valley full of dinosaurs. Decades later, the rights to Turok would fall under Valiant Comics, an imprint of Voyager Communications, who in 1992 would reimagine the character more closely related to the Turok storyline we know these days. Some changes were made, such as the setting of the story and the characters themselves. We play the game as Tal Set, a Native American who is tasked with being the Turok. In this continuity, Turok isn't a name, it's a title passed down from father to son, which tasks his bearer with defending the barrier between Earth and the Lost Land. The Lost Land is described as a place where time has no meaning, as it contains creatures from throughout time and space, the beings having been transported there through wormholes that appear in the real world. This means the player can encounter all sorts of enemies, such as dinosaurs, humans, and aliens. To aid him in the task of defending Earth, in lore, the Turok has an item called the Light Burden, a small leather satchel which contains a fragment of energy from the Big Bang encased in amber. This magical item allows the Turok to access an infinite repository of items, weapons, and food and drink. Gameplay-wise, this isn't explained in the game, as it's something that is explored more in the comics. But it does make sense how Turok would be able to carry all the weapons he has in the game. In the story, an evil cyborg known as the Campaigner is our primary antagonist. The Campaigner is an old enemy of Tal Set, who at one point tried to take the light burden from him. In their fight, Tal Set injured the Campaigner to the point where most of his body had to be switched out with cybernetics. Sometime later, the Campaigner learns of a weapon called the Chronoscepter. The Chronoscepter is an artifact, capable of tearing the fabric of time and space, effectively giving the wielder the possibility to break the barrier between the Lost Land and Earth. The original wielders of the Chronoscepter realized its destructive potential and split the weapon up into 8 parts, scattering the pieces throughout the Lost Land in an effort to stop anyone from using it. The campaigner, after learning of the weapon's existence, builds a massive tower which will act as a focus for the Chronoscepter, increasing its power and allowing him to punch through the dimensional barrier. In turn, and after learning of his enemy's plan, Tal Set vows to find all the pieces of the Chronoscepter before the campaigner does. The campaigner, in turn, mobilizes a massive army of humans, dinosaurs, and aliens to stop Tal Set from gathering the weapon's pieces. The story picks up from here, and we start level 1, which acts as an introduction to the game's mechanics. When we begin, we're armed with nothing more than a bow and a knife, but as we progress throughout the level, we are introduced to new weapons one by one. By the end of the first part, you should be armed with a pistol, a shotgun, and an assault rifle. While Turok is essentially a shooter where you move from point A to get to point B, the game actively rewards you with items, weapons, ammo, and gold triangles for exploring beyond the standard path to your goal. During the game, you will find pedestals containing level keys which later on will be essential to your progression in the game, as you'll need these to access the other levels. Weapons and ammo do the things you'd expect from weapons and ammo, and the gold triangles are essentially points you can collect. Collect 100 of them, and Tal Set will feel the need to remind us that he is, indeed, the Turok. During our travels, we'll encounter blue portals, which show up periodically. These bring us to a sub-level, which switches up the gameplay with small sections where there are sometimes enemies, but mostly contain jumping puzzles. Falling into the blue floor resets you to the beginning of the puzzle, but overall falling off the platforms doesn't punish you by a lot. Also hidden throughout the levels are pieces of the Chronoscepter. These are usually in somewhat harder to reach places and take a bit of platforming to get to. They're not that difficult, but always keep an eye out for them as you make your way throughout the various worlds. As we fight our way through the jungle area, we'll eventually end up at an area with a stone construction. This is where the level keys come into play. Collecting these keys is non-optional, and if you miss any of them as you fight your way through hordes of enemies, you'll be forced to backtrack and collect them later anyway. This is another feature which drives you to explore the levels instead of making your way to the end as quickly as possible. These hub ruins will act as our level hub, allowing us to drop in and out of levels as needed. While normally you could play the levels in a somewhat non-linear fashion, for this video I'll show them to you in a linear sequence. Level 2 is called the Jungle, and doesn't differentiate that much from the prior level in its atmosphere. Throughout the stage, you'll encounter enemies such as human soldiers, leapers, and giant beetles. In comparison to level 1, this level has a bit of a sense of verticality. There's a bit more climbing and platforming involved, which makes use of the logs in the sides of the mountains. Further on in the level, you'll encounter a temple with a large bridge behind it, which connects you to the opposite side of the valley. When you cross the bridge, you'll encounter a system of caves containing a lot of leaper enemies. As you fight your way through the cave, eventually you'll find a closed-off section where you can see a minigun behind it. Unfortunately, unless you have the grenade launcher, this section will be inaccessible for us right now, so if we want to obtain this, we'll have to return at a later date. As we leave the cave, we get into an opening with a lake, where it looks like the higher areas are unavailable. We search throughout the lake and find indentations where one contains an underwater cavern, allowing us to swim through it and end up at the end of the level. Level 2 contains the keys for both level 4 and level 5, but you'll soon realize they are not as easy to find as in the first level. The portal eventually brings us back to the hub ruins, where we'll continue straight on to level 3. The third level is called the Ancient City, and as its name implies, it is a large and old city. It's encircled by mountains, and there's a notable change in atmosphere in comparison to the last 2 sections of the game. Where the last environments were more of a jungle scenery, level 3 gives off more of a desert oasis vibe. This is notable in its use of colors, going from a more green to a warm orange palette. You'll still find ample amounts of green left and right, but the usage of color adds an aspect to the atmosphere which is much more different from the other levels. In this level, you'll encounter a lot of ancient warriors, and the big enemies we've already encountered in level 1 called the Perlin. The warriors and aliens take a lot more shots to go down in this level, so you'll find yourself switching weapons often to conserve your ammunition. As we make our way through the level, we'll be met with an onslaught of enemies popping up left and right while we make our way through the temples and scale the walls of the city. I remember playing this level during my childhood, and I definitely remember this one being particularly harder back in the day. Whether that was because of the control scheme being easier on PC, or just purely on the fact that I was a dumb kid not adept at playing video games, I'll leave that all up to you kids. At the end of level 3, we'll encounter this game's first boss, the Longhunter. Before we face him though, there are some secret items in the circular water pools near where you face him. And once again, we're shown the rewards of exploration in the game, because you'd never find these items if you stuck to the path. As soon as we set foot in the large arena, we'll head to the center. Here, we get a short cutscene of the Longhunter mocking us before he summons a Humvee to attack us. The fight is pretty straightforward. The Humvee will constantly Tokyo drift around you, so if you stay mobile and circle around him, making sure you keep to his side as closely as possible, you should be able to finish it off fairly easily. Take care not to get too much behind the Humvee, as he will sometimes back up, knocking you back and giving you some damage. Be sure to keep an eye on the sides of the arena, as you'll find handy items such as high-powered tech arrows, which will make short work of the vehicle. You'll see the Longhunter pop up at the edges during the Humvee fight as well, but don't waste your ammo on him, as he's protected by a shield and is probably having a good time while we act upon the mission of taking down this diesel-powered foe. After defeating the first Humvee, he summons yet another one. Same tactic as before, and it'll go down easily as well. Finally, after taking down both Humvees, we'll face the Longhunter himself. During this fight, he'll attack you with a boomerang-type weapon. If you keep enough distance between the two of you and attack him with either the shotgun or the tech arrows, he should go down after a bit. When the Longhunter dies, he drops his signature weapon, the pulse rifle. This weapon
will make a fine addition to my collection.
Also after the fight, a platform will raise containing a level key. We'll grab that and make our way back to the hub ruins to proceed to the next level. With our new weapon safely tucked in our light burden satchel, it's time to head into level 4, called the Ruins. The Ruins sees us return to the color palette of the first 2 levels with a bit of a more jungle-esque feel in the beginning, but as soon as we enter the ruins themselves, we'll see that the fogging in the game is a bit more darker and has a bit of a bluish hue. As you move throughout the ruins, you'll pass through caves which hold our favorite leapers and giant beetles that we're familiar with at this point. By this time, most of the enemies have a familiar pattern, and we should be able to handle almost all of them fairly easily. At the end of the level, we'll encounter a giant fortress, which we'll have to get to by bridge. This area is swarming with enemies, so we'll have to watch our ammo. We can't stop though. We have level 6 keys to collect, and unfortunately for these guys, they're in our way. Level 5. We're over the halfway mark on levels, and level 5 is a nice change of scenery in comparison to the others. Level 5 sees us making our way through the catacombs, with winding corridors, underwater sections, and leapers, raptors, and alien infantry around almost any corner. It kinda gave off a bit of an Indiana Jones feel. I forgot to mention this before, but enemies tend to respawn fairly fast in the game, so always keep an eye on your ammo count because you'll find yourself running dry in this level especially. When we finally reach the end of the level, we're greeted by the familiar sight of the portal, so we can head back to the hub ruins. Is what I would say if it was actually the end of the level. No, not this time, champ. It's boss number 2 time, and this time we're fighting the Mantis. The Mantis is a slippery fella. With his constant jumping around, spitting acid on the floor, the boss is definitely a challenge on the N64 version, where during aiming you're sometimes fighting with the controls. See, the first-person view in the N64 version constantly reset back to the middle as soon as you didn't deliberately aim a certain direction with the analog stick, making it sometimes hard to keep up with the Mantis' movements. The fight was definitely easier on the remake, as the mouse and keyboard, in my opinion, lends it a lot better for tracking this enemy. Eventually, we do beat Mantis, of course, giving Talset a good excuse to show his alternative dance routine and rewarding us with a level 8 key. Level 6 brings us to the Treetop Village, and even though we're once again greeted by the jungle-esque atmosphere, that will change the further we head into the level. We make our way forward until we reach a large tree. At first, it will seem that there is no way forward. But when we look up, we'll notice a pathway in the sky. Lo and behold, under the giant tree is a pathway, leading to the upper level where we can continue our journey. The difficulty in this level has an obvious spike, and you'll fight a ton of Perlins, High Priests, along with other enemies we've been facing throughout the entire game. You'll also start to notice that some enemies are getting slight upgrades by this point, as the Dimetrodons will have weapons attached to their backs. We'll see more of this showing up by the next 2 levels, and it's going to take on some bizarre forms. Also, did I forget to mention that I absolutely love the grenade launcher by this point? Oh yeah, that's the stuff. Level 7. We're in the home stretch now, and boy does it show. We find ourselves in the middle of the Lost Land, a desert-like environment, littered with dinosaur bones and human skulls atop of spikes. Remember when I said that enemies were going to get some upgrades? The raptors we knew are gone, because now we are facing Mecha raptors. They have a long-range attack now because of the blaster that has been grafted onto one of their claws. They're not very difficult in comparison to their old form, but the addition of a ranged attack makes it so that you do have to keep moving in order to avoid being hit. Also joining the cast of enemies in this level is a soldier riding a Triceratops that is outfitted with both machine guns and rocket launchers. The way to beat them is almost the same way we beat the Humvee. Strafe and keep to their sides to avoid being shot, and make sure you don't get too close to avoid their stomp attack. The campaigner is pulling out all the stops by this point and decided that mech raptors and the Triceratops aren't enough to stop us. He's also sending in his attack robots, coming in the fantastic colors of strawberry red and pineapple yellow. These things are atrocious. The red attack robot uses a chain gun and is able to dish out a lot of damage, while the yellow variant attacks using a rocket launcher, capable of delivering splash damage. Worst of all, they're almost impervious to small arms fire, limiting your choice of weapons to either the pulse rifle, missile launcher, or the grenade launcher. This level will see you expending ammo like crazy, and it's definitely one of the most action-packed sections in the entire game. Well kids, it's time. The 8th and final level in the game. We're about to bring it home to the campaigner, so let's see what he has in store for us. It's no joke. we start the level off with not one, but two Triceratops, along with a Mech Raptor. These things are bullet sponges to begin with, but facing two of them means you have to dip, duck, dodge, and shoot to get them to go down quickly. Once they're dead, we'll get to the campaigner's fortress. Of course, it's guarded by a red attack robot. Why wouldn't it be? Inside the fortress, you'll find a ton of enemies, ranging from cyborgs to aliens, and of course, more attack robots. The cyborgs won't give us too much trouble, as they're essentially a reskin of the regular soldier enemies. During the level, we'll find a few portals pop up for the sub-levels. We'll use these in order to stock up on lives and other goodies before we get into the final battle, because we'll definitely need it, I think. We continue on through the fortress, and the mission is fairly simple. If it moves, it needs to die. Eventually, once everything is dead enough for our satisfaction, it's time for the final fight with the campaigner. Or so we thought. No, we have one more boss to fight before we take on the big baddie himself, and my god is this one for the record books. Tell me, do you like dinosaurs, kids? Do you like Terminator? Well, here's Thunder, the mechanized Tyrannosaurus Rex. Because of course, we can't have a dinosaur game without a Tyrannosaurus Rex. If you picked up the fusion cannon, this is the time to use it, as the weapon will not work on the campaigner. Of course, being the dadly man that I am, I didn't read the manual, so I stuck to the old trusty shotgun and minigun. Thunder can soak up a lot of damage, and you'll easily expend most of your ammo trying to bring him down. The section before this will give you the opportunity to load up on ammo, and I suggest you use it. There's ammo in the arena you fight him in, but Thunder is fast, ridiculously fast. If you get into one of the corners to pick up the ammo, there's a chance he might trap you there with no escape. His bite attack is ferocious and will finish you off in a few attacks even if you were at full health. Just keep strafing and unload whatever you have on the beast. Keep your distance for the ground attack and dodge to the sides for his eye laser and flamethrower, and eventually he should go down. Or not. Defeating Thunder brings us to the final hallway before we fight the campaigner. If you've been keeping up with your exploring, you should be able to find the last piece of the Chronoceptor here. Actually, you can't really miss it. The Chronoceptor is the most powerful weapon in the game, and oh boy kids, does it show. By collecting the Chronoceptor, you've essentially already beaten the game. The weapon is so insanely powerful that even the campaigner does not stand a chance against it. You get 3 shots. That's it. No ammo refills for this weapon, but I doubt you'll need it anyway. Don't believe me? Trust me kids, I will show you. And that's it. The Chronoceptor is so insanely destructive that the final boss in the game goes down after only 3 shots. Talset basks in his victory for a few seconds before the fortress starts to explode and crumble around him. In a very 90s and dramatic fashion, he manages to escape from his enemy's base of operations and looks up at it as it crumbles down. At least, for now, the Lost Land is safe. So that brings us to the end of Turok Dinosaur Hunter. I think the question I'd like to answer for myself is, do I still think Turok is a good game 25 years later? The answer? Yes. The original version is definitely playable, but considering what we're used to these days in graphical aspects and control, Turok on the N64 shows its age. Keep in mind, the game was a product of its time, and realizing that there was a small and inexperienced team behind it all makes it all the more impressive that they were able to produce a game of this quality on a brand new console in those days. As for the remaster, I feel it plays into a certain group of people that it would be interesting for. There's a lot of people who played Turok on the N64 and might no longer have access to either the cartridge or the console to pick it up and play it again. There's also a group that might have heard of the game before but never managed to get a copy. In my opinion, picking up the remaster is definitely the more enjoyable option to try out this title. The graphics have had a nice overhaul, and the controls have seen a definite improvement from the N64 title. The PC version of the remaster is a very enjoyable high-speed shooter, which will definitely keep you interested for a bit, even though the game is not very long. A while back, I saw the Steam sales going on and saw that you could pick up the remastered version of Turok for around $5. Even as a player who hasn't experienced this game before, that is an absolute steal. The regular price for Turok Remastered is around $20, which is a bit too much in my opinion for a game of this length, but I'm sure you'll be able to find deals online all year round. If you managed to make it to the end of the video, I'd like to thank you for offering your time to me. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to help me out with building this channel, consider clicking the subscribe and like button. Don't feel obligated, but it does mean a lot to us creators. Hey there kids. As you can tell, thanks to the power of editing, I am now in a different shirt than what I started the video with. This has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I refuse to record things in sequence and I'm sometimes a lazy piece of shit. Absolutely not. In any case, if you agree with my take on Turok, or even if you don't, let me know in the comments. I'd like to talk with you guys about it further. With that said, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you all later. Take care.